Hi, I'm Jen Barnes, and you're about to experience how to ditch the old ways of doing things, embrace your neurodivergence, learn tips and tricks to function optimally, and love yourself, neurodivergence and all. Welcome to the Self Loved Woman podcast. Hey, it's Jen. I'm so glad you're here. Today, we're going to talk about how your business needs you to get out of the suck of ADHD and embrace the solution so that you can do the things that you need to do. And as we get into this, I want to name something that I do really well as a coach and certainly in my other business as a therapist is I'm really good in sitting with people in their pain and the suck of the problem. I am really good at identifying the problem and being with people in the problem. And so I get it. With ADHD, whether that's struggling to prioritize or get yourself to focus and not be distracted or figuring out time because of the whole time blindness thing, struggling to get motivated, whatever it is, even the trauma of ADHD, I'm really good at sitting in the suck of it. And I think that's important. I think it's important that we sit with the feelings and work through them at least as long as we need to, so that we can then move into the growth, the healing. And sure, there's layers of it, right? Like you might sit in some of the suck of it now and work through some layers of it, and you're like, sweet. And then another layer might pop up later. But what I see happening sometimes is that a lot of people go through life without ever feeling seen, heard, or validated. And so that when maybe for the first time in your life, someone's like, yeah, I see you, and that does suck. It feels oddly good, right? Because you're being seen and understood and heard. And that is awesome. That's the whole purpose of validating our feelings and experiences and really letting other people see you. And it's my intention as a coach and in my other business as a therapist to really see people and meet them where they're at. And the problem is that can feel so good to finally be seen and validated and held inside of the problem that sometimes parts of us like to stay in the problem so that we keep getting said validation and being seen and heard. Also, because the work of getting out of the problem can be a lot harder than talking about it. And I see this in my private practice with therapy clients, especially people with complex trauma. And some of this probably has its roots in early therapy, where you would go to therapy and talk about the problem that was supposed to help. But what we now know is that only talking about the problem rarely fixes it. That's because with trauma, for example, the trauma is not it's not remembered as a story or narrative in your brain. And you may have heard me talk about this before, but I'll explain it again in case you haven't. When something traumatic is happening, the part of your brain that would need to be online, it's called Broca's area, it's part of the prefrontal cortex. That part of the brain in charge of speech that would need to be online to create the narrative, the words for the story about what's happening is not really online when you are in your fight or flight response or shutdown response, when you're being traumatized. And so it might work a little bit, but when you're actually being traumatized, like when something horrible is happening to you, that part of your brain isn't really accessible. And so traumatic memory gets stored in a different way and it gets stored in the body. You've probably heard the title of Bessel van der Kolk's book, The Body Keeps the Score, even just said as a phrase like, oh, the body keeps the score. And it's true because, as I talked about in a recent episode, the things that happen to us, especially traumatic things, are encoded in body sensations and smells and sounds and images instead of language. And so that's a big piece of why only talking about the hard things that have happened is not going to help you move the needle. That's why we need to involve the body. And also, this is true for ADHD because a lot of times we have some even trauma, you could call it, unhealed wounds stored in the body, not to mention grief and loss. This is a piece of ADHD that people don't talk a lot about because growing up ADHD, we maybe had all these big ideas and plans, and maybe some of us were able to realize them. And maybe some of us got to a place where we're like, oh boy, nope, hit a wall. And we chose to do something else. And maybe some of us grieved that, and maybe some of us didn't need to grieve it, and we moved on and whatever. But for some, there can be a lot of grief around how ADHD may have gotten in the way for you in the past. And that may be stuck in your body. And so today, what I want to do is I want to talk about possibility, where things can be, because I know you know the problem. You are living the problem. And I think by now you know that I know the problem because I used to live the problem and I work with other people living in the problem. And what I want to help us see today is the possibility of where you can be with your ADHD, where you can be with your business, even with ADHD. In fact, maybe even because of ADHD. And so, in this episode, we're going to do this in three ways. I'm going to share some of my story, some of which you already know, but I want to share a little bit more leaning into the possibility. And then we're going to shift into talking about what is likely keeping you stuck from moving into the possibility. And then last but not least, we'll talk about how to shift out of that stuckness, how to move into the possibility. So I'm really excited for this episode because we're going to cover a lot. So buckle up. The first thing I want to share is a little bit about my story. And you've probably heard pieces of it, right? Like I learned how to function as a girl in Catholic school. I was terrified of being in trouble. I saw what happened to the kids who were in trouble who had ADHD, probably. I mean, looking back, I'm like, oh, yeah, they definitely did. And I saw them being in trouble, and it did not go well for them. And somehow I had the wherewithal to figure out how to mask my ADHD by over functioning, like working really, really hard and high achievement. Because if I was working really, really hard, at least they saw me trying. So then I didn't get in as much trouble because they could tell I was working hard. Like it was very obvious. And because then I was high achieving, which I know there's certain things that allow us to do that, right? Not everyone can be high achieving, whether that's natural endowments of intelligence or whether that's your family environment and how they value education, or if your family environment wasn't safe, then that would have been really hard to do, right? So just honoring that we all have what we're gifted from our families and our birth. And for whatever reason, I was able to figure out like, oh, okay, if I work really, really extra hard, then I can achieve. And when I achieve, when I get really good grades, yeah, there's commentary about me talking too much. And yeah, I did get the negative comments and the criticism about it. And sometimes even shame and humiliation from some of the teachers, which you've probably heard me talk about. But for the most part, there was never a severe punish for me like there was for some of the other kids with ADHD who did not have access to or choose to take that same path, whatever it is, right? And that worked really well for me. The over functioning, the high achieving worked really, really well for me until I got out of college. I was an actuarial analyst, so I was taking actuarial exams, which are very, very hard exams. They pass only 28% of the people on average every time, most people not taking it the first time. So they are very, very challenging exams, even for someone really gifted in mathematics, as I feel that I have been. And it's all independent study. And I couldn't learn fast enough. I now know because of my ADHD to make that happen. And so I fell apart, right? I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, which now I know was secondary to my ADHD. But back then I didn't know that. And so I did everything I could. I read every single book my therapist ever recommended. I practiced all the exercises and I got better. And there were bumps along the way. I still struggled socially. And so that piece of learning and growth didn't come probably till my early to mid 30s, where I had married a very nice man. But really, when I look back, as nice of a guy as he was not at all a fit for me, nor is really marriage a fit for me. I'm not saying it's not a fit for other people, but for me, it's just not because I do better living alone where I don't have all the extra stimuli. And that just works better for me and my brain and my lifestyle. And so I look back at that and it was like, oh, yeah, I thought I was supposed to get married because that's the generation I'm in. And so I married the first nice guy who had a good job, who treated me well, and was relatively good looking, who asked. Right? And I feel bad about that, don't get me wrong, but he's happily remarried, and I'm really happy for him. They're a much better fit than we ever were. But there's that, there's some of the friendships that I would not even call friendships, but attempts at friendships I had that I stumbled through and was, quote, unquote, "friends" with people who really weren't my friends, and all of that, and it was painful, and here's what I'm gonna tell you. I no longer have issues with any of these things. That's not to say things don't pop up once in a while, but now, if I want to get something done, I can just do it. I'm able to motivate myself. I'm able to focus. I'm able to prioritize. Sure, there's some days where maybe it's harder than others. There can be an ebb and flow. But then the difference is on those days, I don't shame myself. On those days, I'm like, okay, this is a lower productivity day. That's how it's going to be. So let's narrow down our focus and figure out what we really need to do then if we're going to be less productive today. Because that's just how it is, right? So there's this kind of acceptance of how my brain and body and I guess ADHD function in this world that I've created for myself. I also have set things up in my life and my business the ADHD way to really make my life and business easier to navigate with ADHD. So I'm not having to fight and jump over hurdles to do things. It's just kind of set up in the way that accommodates me automatically. And as far as socially, sure, there's moments where I still can stumble. And I figured out how to navigate some of the social piece. And there's still layers of it, right? Figuring out how much do you choose to mask when you're with neurotypical people versus how much do you choose not to mask and then maybe just they're not your people, right? Some of that is something I'm still working through. But none of this bothers me anymore. I figured out how to do this in a way where I'm really productive and have 2 businesses and function really, really well. And I share this because I want to lean into what's possible for you. I'm not different than you. We both have ADHD. We both probably were diagnosed with with anxiety and or depression at some point and maybe still struggle with one or both of those things. And we probably both have been ridiculed for our ADHD, had some social struggles because of ADHD, and maybe didn't meet every single goal we set out for ourselves because of it. Maybe we got to a point in our life where we're like, who am I even? Because of all the masking, we didn't really have a sense of who we are. I know that happened to me for sure. And I want to tell you that there's a way through it. And the way through it, this is not going to be popular, but it's true, is pain. And why do I say that? Well, let me back up here. When we look at what motivates people, people are much more motivated by something that will, like, avoiding something that will cause pain than by working for something that is a reward. It's just how our brains are wired. That's why so much of our marketing in the world talks about pain and avoiding pain, because if we talk about preventative things People are like, "Oh, yeah, yeah." But if we talk about avoiding pain and getting out of pain, that's what our brains listen to. That's what our brains respond to. And I can tell you, as someone who was trained as a therapist, we call this therapeutic discomfort. And if you've ever been in any kind of AA circle or chemical dependency, substance abuse circle, you've heard people talk about rock bottom, right? Oh, they haven't gotten to their rock bottom yet. Or it wasn't till I hit rock bottom that I changed. And what all of that is talking about is that in order to really feel ready to put forth the effort, there has to be some discomfort. How much discomfort is kind of up to you because the universe will send you messages. And if you don't believe in the universe, whatever you believe in, God, nature, your highest self, energy, but you will get messages that are often little pain points to start with. They're like little pebbles dropping in your path, almost like a little pebble hitting you in the head. It's like, ooh, that wasn't fun. And that's kind of your first indication that, ooh, there may be something here that could be addressed. This isn't ideal. And you can choose to catch it when it's that little pebble where there's a little sting when it hits you, but it's not life threatening and it's not as painful. But if you choose to ignore it or don't attend to whatever the problem is at that point, that pebble's just going to get bigger and bigger and turn into a rock and eventually a boulder until you can no longer ignore the problem. And you probably have experienced this at some point in your life. I certainly experienced this with friendship. I, oh boy, this is a long road. I don't know that I'm going to unpack the whole thing, but once I got to high school, I struggled socially, and so I masked a ton, trying to be really nice to everybody, which I now see was probably really annoying. But anyway, I masked trying to make it through, and it worked well enough, but still not fantastic. And the same in college. I don't know that I did that much better there. I learned that if you bashed other people to someone, that they would be your friend, which isn't really aligned with how I want to be in the world. So, I tried that out, and in my early 20s, I was an actuary, so I was so busy studying and working that I didn't really have time for social connections. And then by the time I got into my late 20s and early 30s, I was hanging out with some people from the gym and connecting with them, and I thought they were my friends. But I was going through a really hard time, and let's just say as I was struggling with the I don't wanna say, like, the breakdown of my marriage, because I was the one who chose to be divorced, but just the recognition that I had chosen something that wasn't a fit and that maybe I didn't know who I was, and the breakdown of all of that, along with the anxiety and depression that came alongside of all of these journeys. I wasn't a very good friend, and I'd seen signs of it before. I wouldn't get included in things or in high school, my friends would kind of make fun of me in front of my face, but they thought it was behind my back. And and there were little pebbles, but I didn't catch them until all of a sudden in my very early 30s, maybe late 20s, early 30s, all of a sudden, very few of my friends were even talking to me anymore. And I didn't understand why, but that was my boulder. I was super alone at a time when I was struggling the most in my life that I had ever struggled. And I chose to pay attention to the boulder, and it took some work. But it was that pain, it was that rejection from people who I thought were my friends that was the greatest gift they ever could have given me. Because it was that pain, that discomfort, that for me, rock bottom, which thankfully wasn't too terrible. I mean, as far as rock bottoms go, it could have been much, much worse. But that is what allowed me to heal and grow. So when we talk about how do you get yourself out of the problem? How do you get yourself out of focusing on, oh, I can't do that because of my ADHD or oh, I just can't focus because of ADHD. Some of it is letting the pain of it motivate you to do something different and choosing to do something different. And that can be hard. And I guarantee that if you're not ready yet, there will be other reminders in your life about why it's important to do this work, if it is important in your life. You might be like, Jen, I got no problems with my ADHD. And then that's fantastic. Good for you. You've probably done whatever work you needed to do with it. Maybe you've set yourself up in life in a way that really matches how your ADHD brain is. And that's fantastic. But if you're still in that place of catching yourself saying, "Oh, I can't get motivated because my ADHD," or "Oh, procrastinator because of ADHD," and then feeling any kind of not positive way about that, there's pain there. And that means there's an ability to grow and change. And now you might be like having parts of you go, "That bitch, what is she talking about? This is ADHD. We can't help it." And totally get that, right? Totally get that there are parts of you that believe there's nothing you can do. And I'm not in any way saying that ADHD is a superpower and that you can pretend like you don't have it. But what I am saying is there's some healing work that you can do. There's some setting up of your life and your business to live and work the ADHD way and to release the past wounds that you hold so that you don't have to struggle. And then the times when maybe it feels like you're a little less motivated or it's a little harder to focus, you know what to do with that. Whether that's regulating your nervous system or saying, like, oh no, this is a low productivity day. Let's shift it. Let's shift the focus for today. But doing that from a place of radical acceptance and love instead of shame and self loathing. And I want to talk a little bit about, I said I'd get to how we do this, right? And I do want to say one other thing about what might be keeping you stuck in this is that you might have parts of you that are afraid of what would happen if you tried something new. They might be concerned that if you were to work really hard at figuring out how to navigate your ADHD effectively, that if it didn't work, then you'd be out of options and really depressed and struggling. It might be that you doubt your ability to even do it. So a part of you is like, why bother? You may have any number of parts inside of you that are concerned about what would happen if you did something other than stay in the problem. And if that's you, I get it. Those parts are trying to help you. They're trying to help you not be in more pain. And the problem is what they don't know, because they probably came online in your life when you were a lot younger and before this was something you understood, is that the only way out of this pain is through it. The only way out is through. And so instead of avoiding or hiding or pushing down, it's a leaning in. It's a leaning in with curiosity and compassion. It's a leaning in with self compassion of like, oh, what's this about? And not shaming yourself, or when you have a part of you that shames you, leaning in and being curious about what that part's intention is to shame you. A lot of times that part is trying to keep you safe. So helping you get unstuck can be working with these parts that are keeping you unstuck. So that's one piece of it. But that takes a lot more one-to-one work, and I'm happy to do that work with you if you wanna work with me one-to-one. I'll put the application for a curiosity call or clarity call with me in the show notes, so that way if you're interested in seeing if we'd be a fit for one-to-one coaching, you're welcome to fill that out. Note that that's only for people who are actually interested in working with me. It's not just a freebie call. It's literally to figure out how we might work together with your ADHD. So if you're not ready to invest time, money, and energy on it, then that one's not for you. You can leave that for another time. But something you can do right now is, and this comes from motivational interviewing, is to reflect on if you are ready, willing, and able to change. So those 3 things are different. Being ready, you might be like, "Oh my gosh, I am so ready. I'm so tired of this." And that's great. But willing is interesting because willing is like, are all the parts of you willing? It's going to take work. And you know what? Change is almost always uncomfortable because you're stepping outside of your comfort zone. And so you have to be willing to leave the comfort of where you are into discomfort to trying something new and staying there until that becomes your new norm and is more comfortable. So there has to be a willingness to do that. And parts of you are going to have to feel safe enough to do that. And then the third piece of that is able. Are you at a place in your life where you can do that? I've had clients who are in the middle of a major relationship upheaval in their life. And whether that's going through a divorce or even domestic violence or other things, or maybe you just had a baby, this may not be the time for that deep work. Or maybe it is. Maybe you're like, I just birthed the baby. I can birth this. I don't know. I've not birthed a human child, so I can't speak to what that would be like. But it's important to see, like, are you able to? You may be really ready and willing, but when you look at what else is going on, it might just not be now. And so then what the work that you can do now is to consider, what do you need to do to get ready? What do you need to do to be ready to do this work? Energetically, emotionally, mentally, physically? What do you need to do to be willing to do this work? Maybe it's getting curious about what inside of you is like, nope, nope, we're not doing that. Right? That can be the first piece. And then asking yourself, what do I need to do to be able to do this? One thing I see comes up for a lot of people is, oh, I need more money. So then asking, how can I afford this? Not, oh, I'll do it when I can afford it. Because something I've noticed as a mental health professional, I do have some clients who very much prioritize their mental health, some clients, coaching clients who prioritize their ADHD and healing and growing their business, and that's fantastic. But I also notice a lot of women are like, "Oh, that's for my own self wellness and health and care, and so I'll do that when I have the money." And when I have the money, just FYI, is gonna be never, because you're always gonna find money for something else. So if you're ready and willing, the able piece is, how can you get yourself to afford whatever work you wanna do? Whether that's with me or with another coach or a program, whether that's Ascend or my low ticket Ignite or any other program you see, whether that's buying a book that might help you with it. It's figuring out, how can you be able? How can you be able to do it? So you might take some time. Here's some journal points for you. What do you need to do to be ready? What do you need to do to be willing? What do you need to be do to be able? And what feels like it's getting in the way of those things? That will help you be able to embrace what is possible for you with your ADHD. Because I'm going to tell you what, yes, there are challenges with ADHD, but number one, I believe that there are only challenges because of how our world is set up. Our world is set up for neurotypical people. Someday, and this is like a dream of mine, I hope it happens in my lifetime, but sometimes there'll be the recognition that there are neurodivergences and that no one way of your brain being is better than the other. In fact, we need them all. Evolutionarily, we need them all. When we were tribal, we needed people with ADHD who were very alert and taking in way more stimuli so that we could catch the little berries for food and we could also catch the danger. And we needed people who could be more focused and feel motivated by what's important instead of what's interesting. So we balance each other out. We need these different ways of the brain being. It's just that right now, the world only recognizes the need for neurotypicality. And so the world is set up for that. So a lot of the problems we have with ADHD aren't actually our ADHD. It's just that we're trying to fit our beautiful star peg brain into a round hole of neurotypicality. And if we can instead start to shift how our life is set up, then things will be different. Things will be different. All right. I know I had a bunch of points going on there, but I got so excited that I got to use my metaphor of awesome ADHD star brain that I literally cannot remember what my other points were. But that's an ADHD moment. And what I'm going to tell you is see, ADHD still pops up and we don't have to feel any shame about it. It's like, all right, that's kind of what happened now. We can name it and normalize it that this is what our brain does. And so, as you do this work, as you step into getting yourself ready, willing, and able towards what's possible, towards that same place of self acceptance, self compassion, and self love, as well as setting your life up to work for your ADHD, setting your work up for your ADHD, the possibility will be yours. So I'm so glad you're here and thank you for listening. If you are interested in doing some one-to-one coaching with me, you can complete the coaching app. I'll put the link in the show notes to do a one-to-one to see if we'd be a fit for coaching. It'll be a short call just to figure that out. Otherwise, if you're not following already, please follow. And if you haven't shared yet, or if you think this would be useful for someone to hear, I'd love it if you share. And all right, y'all, that's all I have for today. Thank you for being here. Again, follow and share. I'll see you next time. Take care.